I'm speaking with Ted N. Easterling, author of War in the Villages, the U.S. Marine Corps Combined Action Platoons in the Vietnam War, to be published April 13th, 2021 by University of North Texas Press. Thank you very much for speaking with me.
It's a pleasure. Happy to be here.
So first, so you were a Marine in the Vietnam War, but what prompted you to write this book?
Well, taking that into consideration, I was in the Marines in Vietnam, and I was always somewhat bitter because of the way the war ended, and just about the war generally. But when I started my studies, my formal history studies, I've always enjoyed military history, and I liked the history of the Vietnam War. I studied that, and I studied a good amount of counterinsurgency theory and history. And I read a lot about the CAP platoons, the Combined Action Platoons, and they seemed like a good counterinsurgency idea, a good concept. And I saw mixed reviews on them. A lot of people said they liked them and they were good, but they never really mentioned specifically why they thought they were good or bad as a counterinsurgency technique. And at the same time, there was criticism of them as well, because people were saying that, for instance, they were too small, they were too isolated, and they were too vulnerable to attack as a result of that. And also, I remember one criticism was that they were taking manpower away from the larger units where they could have been used on the search and destroy missions. And I thought that was really more as if they were wanting to throw good money after bad. But so I thought, well, I wanted to take a look at the Combined Action Platoons to see whether or not they were a good counterinsurgency concept. And so I looked at some of the counterinsurgency theory, especially that which was popular at the time, and which was, and I used some concepts from David Galula and from Robert Thompson, and I listed about 7 of those, I think, and I used those to evaluate the Combined Action Platoon performance in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. And I see that, so you have your Ph.D. in history, but do you want to say a few words about your military career?
Again, I served in Vietnam as a Marine enlisted man, and I was a combat engineer, and we were frequently attached to infantry units for their demolition work, and I did a lot of that. So I was on a lot of search and destroy operations. And I mean, even at that time, I was there from 66 to 67. And I remember that even at that time, I remember thinking when I was, well, near the end of my tour, but I was thinking, this really isn't working very well. And I thought at the time that a good corporal would tell you that it's not working very well.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, too, I spent a lot of time at Cantien, which was a fixed position along the DMZ, part of what they call Leatherneck Square. But and that was a shooting gallery. I mean, we sat there and absorbed the punishment of the VC artillery, pardon me, the MVA artillery from dug-in positions in the DMZ and in North Vietnam itself. And it all looked as if it wasn't working very well at the time. So yeah, those were my thoughts at the time.
And did you get out of the Marine Corps, or did you? How many years were you in? I'm just curious. What led to your PhD?
Oh, 3 years. Well, yeah, I didn't start my PhD until I was, I think I was 51 years old. I always loved history, but you know, my life was an odyssey of sorts, and I finally decided I had a job teaching in prisons for the state of Ohio, and I had tuition reimbursement, and at the time I was reading about 2 hours of history a night on my own. As I said, I've always loved history.
Hmm.
And so I thought, well, I'll start working on a master's, which would increase my pay level. And I got my master's. I was teaching under a very good advisor, Dr. Walter Hickson at the University of Akron. I had some excellent instructors, and I kept working on my Ph.D. and eventually I got it. And my dissertation had to do with the combined action platoons, and that led to my book.
Hmm. Okay, so let's talk about the book then. How do you break it down chronologically, or do you look at certain themes, or what's your approach?
I look at it chronologically, but I was looking at the combined action platoons and their performance initially. And as I said, according to the counterinsurgency tasks I developed by which to judge them. And then I came to see that the strategy of the war was very, very important in that there was a conflict as to what strategy should be used in the war. General Westmoreland had chosen a strategy of attrition for the war, and the primary tactic within that strategy was the search and destroy mission.
Hmm.
There was some controversy regarding that, even from the beginning, even prior to Westmoreland's beginning the use of that strategy and those tactics, but wasn't effective in stopping it. But there was criticism of it. And Johnson, of course, President Johnson supported him in the pursuit of that strategy. But in the Marine Corps, there was a lot of criticism of that strategy, and one of the primary spokesmen for the people who opposed that strategy was General Krulak, Victor Krulak, and he was a brilliant man, and he had studied counterinsurgency extensively, and he had been an advisor to McNamara beginning in 1962 for special advisor for counterinsurgency and special activities. And he discussed these with both McNamara and Kennedy. And he did a lot of research on counterinsurgency. He was very interested in it because I think he saw that not only this was something with which the Marine Corps in the United States was going to be involved in the near future, and also because it looked as if we might become involved in Vietnam. So it was he was preparing for that possibility.
Hmm.
He spoke with Robert Thompson, Robert Thompson, who was influential in his thinking. Thompson told him that the trust of the people was primary, and that protection was the best thing and the most necessary thing for the counterinsurgents to give the people. And he said after that, various things can follow: health, education, other forms of welfare, but the protection was the primary consideration. So Krulak proposed a different strategy, a strategy different from that of attrition, certainly. And he was very critical of the strategy of attrition, but he proposed that they use an enclave strategy, which is similar to an oil spot strategy in counterinsurgency. That is, they take control of an area and then expand out from that area, driving the insurgents away from the area and expanding it in that manner. And it was an enclave strategy because it was done on the coast, the northeastern portion of South Vietnam, from just a short distance below the DMZ where Phu Bai was located, then continuing on to Da Nang to the south of that, and then Chu Lai to the south of that. His thinking was that if that area could be controlled and if the insurgents could be kept away from that, and this was very important because, as I said, Krulak was really a very a very good student of counterinsurgency. He saw that this was the weakness of the National Liberation Front main force units and the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army. This portion of the coast of northeastern South Vietnam was an area that was only approximately 7,000 square kilometers.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in the entire area of I Corps, where the Marine Corps was in control, the five northern provinces of South Vietnam, was approximately 27,000 square kilometers. And again, that enclave portion was about 7,000 square kilometers, but within that 7,000 square kilometers, that strip of land along the coast, approximately 450,000 tons of rice were produced. And the majority of the population lived in that area. And also vast amounts of salt and fish were produced in that area. Then the interior, away from that 7,000 square kilometer area, which then, as I said, would be the enclave protected.
Mm-hmm.
The area in the interior was very mountainous, and it was heavily vegetated, and there was little food grown there, and there were few people living there. But this was the area where the North Vietnamese troops and the National Liberation Front guerrillas hid themselves. They hid in these areas. So they had very little food. They couldn't grow any food in there. So they got their food from the coastal area where the majority of it was grown. And their link to that, the important link, really the vital link, was the guerrilla movement. And Krulak saw that, and he thought if that link could be broken, if the guerrillas could be kept away from the people, away from the villages, they would be kept away from the food that was necessary to feed their soldiers. Mm-hmm. They would be kept away from recruits for the National Liberation Front main units, main force units. They'd be kept away from other supplies they needed from the people, including tax money, which they extorted from the people. Mm-hmm. And they'd also be kept away from intelligence that the people could provide. So without these things, Krulak said, without these things, first, without the food, they'd starve. They'd starve without the food. They would have fewer troops as a result of not having any recruits, fewer supplies, less of the tax money, and less intelligence. So this was the vital link that he wanted to sever. But and that's an important point that I make in my book. I talk about insurgencies, and any insurgency really can't exist without the support of the population. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't any different. It wasn't any different in South Vietnam. It had to have the support of the population, a majority of the population. First, guerrillas need to hide among the people. Sometimes to make sure that the people don't expose them to the government forces. They need to, and then they hide in remote areas away from the government forces. And in those areas, they depend on the people not to reveal their sources, and they need the goodwill of the people, because and the support of the people, because they need those recruits, they need that food, they need the supplies, and they need the intelligence. Mm-hmm. And without those things, an insurgency can't exist. And Krulak knew that. He was saying, if those things could be taken away from the main force units in the interior of I Corps, then the guerrillas would be the NVA and the NLF could bring food down the trails from North Vietnam, but this would mean they'd have fewer. It would be very difficult, of course, and it would mean they'd have fewer military supplies.
Mm-hmm. I'm speaking with Ted N. Easterling, author of War in the Villages. You can find more information about the book at the University of North Texas Press website. If you like this episode of Military History Inside Out so far, please tap the like button and bullseye the subscribe button. All of my social media links are listed at the end of this episode. Now back to the video.
So, and Krulak made a really interesting point. Well, first, Westmoreland had begun his strategy of attrition. He'd begun his search and destroy missions, as I said, as a central tactic for those. And Krulak made a strategic appraisal in June of 1965. And in that, he made known what I said previously about his desire to have an enclave strategy for I Corps. And at the same time, he was saying they should, if they did that in I Corps and they did it in the Mekong Delta, they'd be eliminating almost all the food for the guerrilla forces and for the main force units. So that was very important. He made one really interesting statement, though, in that strategic appraisal, I thought. He said the NLF, National Liberation Front, and the NVA had one basic tactic, and they used that to defeat the French, and they used it to defeat the South Vietnamese army, and they were using it against the Americans. And that was, they would find an isolated position, they would carefully plan. They always like careful planning. The NVA and the NLF were always very much in favor of a lot of sand table preparation, things of that sort. But they would select an isolated position. They would carefully plan an attack on it. And then prior to their attack on it, they would look at the routes where reinforcements might come to reinforce the unit being attacked. And they would place ambushes along these. And that the damage done in the attack on the isolated position was important, but the most important aspect of the battle was the ambush attack on the reinforcing troops, because this was calculated to do more damage. He said this was the one tactic they used to defeat the French. The primary tactic is to defeat the French. They used it for many defeats they inflicted on the Arvin troops. He said they were using a variation of this to attack the search and destroy operations. They would lure the search and destroy. They watched how the search and destroy operations moved as they went on these operations, and they started to use sniper fire and small attacks to see how they'd react to them. And in this way, they could draw American troops into pre-planned ambush sites. And this is why so often in the Vietnam War, we see units going into pre-planned ambushes. They could lure people into these areas, and then they would do as they'd done with the isolated position situations. They would affect the ambush, and then they'd wait for the other troops to come to help the ambush troops, and they would then in turn ambush them. So I thought that was interesting. But Krulak proposed this alternative strategy, and there was this constant conflict during the war between the two strategies for the ground war, that of attrition and that of the enclave strategy that a number of prominent Marine Corps generals proposed, and for which Krulak was the primary spokesman.
So let's talk about what the CAPs were. Did these Marines lived in the villages? Is that correct?
Yes, they did. And that was, I think that's part of the attraction of the CAP idea. When people read about these, I mean, there's an element of romance to them, and it's such an adventurous concept. These Marines live with, there was a squad of Marines, but the Marines and Popular Forces militiamen, South Vietnamese Popular Forces militiamen, lived together, and they lived in the villages, and they defended the villages against the NLF and the NVA. and then they helped the people during the day and fought the guerrillas during the night.
Mhm.
And that's as I said, that's an intriguing concept. That led me to question, as I said, how effective it was. I mean, it certainly sounds interesting, but did it work?
And how big were the how big of an element was living in each of these villages?
Well, the villages could be 10 square miles in size, and they could have as many as 5,000 people, and that varied. They could be larger. And within that area, they had a squad of Marines. Now, this is TO&E. This is they had 14 men, 14 Marines, which was a regular Marine squad at the time, which was comprised of 3 fire teams of 4 men each, with and again, officially it was a corporal as the fire team leader. And then they had the squad leader, who was supposed to be a sergeant. It could be a sergeant or a corporal. And then they had a man called the assistant squad leader carried an M79 grenade launcher. So there were 14 men. And for purposes of the CAPs, they had a Navy corpsman, a medic assigned to the squad. Then the Popular Forces component was approximately 30 to 35 men, and a leader was a sergeant, and the remainder of the men were privates.
Mhm.
So you had a force of, as I said, at maximum strength, it was about 45 men. But more often it was many fewer than that. You could have as few as 6 Marines and maybe 15 or 20 Popular Forces troopers.
And the Popular Forces were Vietnamese, correct?
Yes, they were. They were militiamen from the village. And when they conceived the idea of combining the Marines with the Popular Forces, I think there was some question on the part of some people as to whether or not they should do it, because the Popular Forces were generally seen as poorly trained, poorly led, poorly armed, poorly paid, and one of the least competent, generally incompetent South Vietnamese military force. So there was that. They were not thought of as a military force.
Mhm. And the Marines, though, did they have control over the Popular Forces, or they just worked alongside them?
There was they worked on a basis where they were equal, except in times of combat. In combat, the Marines were in charge.
Mhm.
And it was always a delicate balance because of the sensitivity of the Popular Forces to being controlled by the Marines, but they generally worked it out. And a lot of this was due to the fact that when they conceived this idea of the combined action platoons, they made sure that the Marines chosen were carefully chosen. They were men who had a desire to work with the Vietnamese and to help them. And also they put them through the Marines through a training period. Often they put them through a training period where they'd understand the culture of the Vietnamese and understand the Popular Forces. And they wanted men who were sensitive to the needs of the Vietnamese and who had a commitment to help them.
Mhm. It seemed like this was partially a volunteer thing then, maybe
It
not
was
always.
well, yeah, at best it was volunteer. There were instances where people did not volunteer, but they were sent, and part of this was because uh, they had to get the Marines for the CAP units for these combined action platoons from the infantry for the most part. So they would request the infantry units to send men for the CAP. They said, we want your best men. We want men who are proven in combat, men who have good leadership skills and who won't be a disciplinary problem, things of this sort.
Mm-hmm.
But this, of course, created a conflict of interest in the infantry companies because they wanted to keep their best people. So very often they sent people who were discipline problems, or they just sent people randomly to the combined action platoon. One way the combined action platoons could control this, though, was that they were able to have a person dismissed, sent away from the combined action platoons if the man created a problem in the unit. And this was not only because they wanted the units to work well, but it was a question of survival for the Marines and the combined action platoons, because if they didn't work well with the people, then it could create a real problem. It could alienate a lot of the people from the combined action platoons, and it could lead to their being killed.
Were they linked pretty well to combat support and also just to general support for supplies and that sort of thing?
Well, initially they weren't. They were made a part of the battalion which was closest to them, and this was a poor organizational structure. Initially, though, and in my book I make the point that it looks as if it was just a matter of the easiest way to create the organization than anything that was thought out too clearly. But so the CAPs were made part of the infantry battalion, which was closest to them, and the battalion was responsible for keeping this CAP supplied and for providing equipment for them in some instances. But this caused problems because the supplies for the CAPs and the equipment for the CAPs had to be taken from the infantry battalions. And this caused a lack of supplies in some instances, but it was even worse when that particular infantry battalion might move and the CAPs suddenly found that their 50 caliber machine gun, their radio, and some other equipment was taken from them, and they were without it for a period of time.
The battalions, what were they on fixed bases, or did they have temporary locations? How were these battalions originally situated?
Well, they had missions of their own they were supposed to accomplish, and that was part of the conflict there, because at times a battalion would move and another battalion might move in, but at times a battalion would move and the CAPs were dependent on the battalions, not only for the equipment and supplies, but there was also the battalions were responsible for sending relief forces to help the CAPs if the CAPs were attacked by a large force. And so periodically the battalion would move, and all of a sudden the battalion would get a call that the CAPs needed help, and they were, of course, were involved in whatever mission they were assigned, and they had to try to make the best they could of it, and so did the CAPs, of course. So that was an awkward situation as well. The battalions, the artillery support for the battalions was had to help the CAPs also. And this wasn't usually a problem because the artillery didn't move that much, but there were times, there could have been times, there were, I think, when the CAPs needed artillery support and the artillery was being used for missions in support of the battalion. So it was an awkward arrangement.
And did you say it eventually changed?
Yeah, it did. Really, what happened was that as they saw the worth of the CAPs.
And around what year are we talking when they started to shift?
1967, really. In 67, they decided, the Marine Corps had tried to use various ways to have well, initially they wanted the ARVN, the South Vietnamese Army, to work on pacification within these enclaves. And they wanted the popular forces and the regional forces to do that also. But a problem with that was that they simply didn't do a very good job. The ARVN was, the Army of Vietnam didn't treat the people very well. And as I mentioned in the book, they often acted toward the people as if the people were a subjected population. So they didn't like working with the people particularly, and they didn't work very well with them. And the PFs were too poorly trained and too poorly equipped to really do a good job of defending these villages within the enclave. So the Marine Corps tried various ways to have the ARVN and the PFs work to pacify the villages within the enclaves, but it didn't work well. So they were looking for another way to do that. In the meantime, the Combined Action Platoons had been initiated in Hubei in approximately July of 1965, and really they began operating in August of 1965. And initially their mission was the defense of the villages, and they really didn't have they didn't have a mission of pacifying the villages, of helping the villages, things of this sort. That wasn't their official mission. But then whereas, as I said, the Marine Corps tried using the ARVN and the PFs, and they intended to have them protect and pacify these villages within the enclaves. So the Marine Corps started to see, as I said, they initiated the CAPs with the intention of having them defend the villages against the guerrillas. There were some pacification missions given to these people, but they weren't official missions, really. They were doing some pacification. But then in 1966, General Walt, who was the commander in I Corps, requested Lieutenant Colonel Corson, William Corson, come to South Vietnam and to be put in charge of the 3rd Tank Battalion which was close to Da Nang. And Corson began a pacification experiment called the Phong Bach experiment. And my thinking is that Walt asked him to come there, and that they were really thinking that at that time that they needed a way for the Marine Corps to pacify the enclaves themselves. They thought they couldn't depend on the ARVN, and they couldn't depend on the PFs, and the Marine Corps would have to do it on its own. Now, Corson was at least one of the foremost experts on insurgency in the Marine Corps. He'd had a career. He had been an enlisted man in World War II, and he re-enlisted after the war. He got a degree in math from the University of Chicago, and he re-enlisted in the Marine Corps and started to work with the CIA. He was an officer in the Marine Corps, but a lot of his work was done with the CIA, and he was working with insurgents. He said that was his career, working with insurgencies in Asia. And he spoke fluent Chinese. And he came to Vietnam, as I said, in September of 1966 to command the Tank Battalion, began this pacification experiment at Phong Bach. And he said that there he was trying to develop a way of pacification for that could be used within the CAP platoon. So I think the thinking on the part of Walt and Krulak and General Nickerson was that they wanted Corson to come and take over command of the CAP platoons. Now that became more of a likelihood, or after Corson completed this experiment at Phong Bach and then he was given command of the CAP platoons. He was told he was going to be use them for pacification in the enclaves, in the villages of South Vietnam.
I'm speaking with Ted N. Easterling, author of War in the Villages. You can find more information about the book at the University of North Texas Press website. If you like this episode of Military History Inside Out so far, please tap the like button and bullseye the subscribe button. All of my social media links are listed at the end of this episode. Now back to the video. How dangerous a duty was it being in the CAP?
It was dangerous, and as I said, officially they only took volunteers. It could be very dangerous. They worked, as I said, in small units in large areas. The VC, the National Liberation Front guerrillas, were blocked from the villages, as I said, where they got those supplies they needed for their insurgency, and they tried to kill them as often as they could. The combined action platoons were good, though. They worked because they combined the Marines and their professionalism, their fighting ability, and their idealism, their enthusiasm, with the knowledge of the Popular Forces troops. The Popular Forces troops knew the area. They knew many of the people who had relatives among the VC. They knew many of the families. They related to many of the families in the area. And of course, they'd lived in the area all their lives. They knew the fighting techniques of the NLF. So having the two together was an excellent, and having them work together well was very good as a pacification technique. It could be dangerous, but they had an extensive intelligence network. That was one of the tasks they needed to set up. And very often in one way, the way they achieved their intelligence network, one of the primary ways was simply by defending the villages from the National Liberation Front guerrillas, which kept the threat of any sort of retribution away, and also by treating the people well, just treating them in a humane manner. That was an important part of their success. And also, they took nothing from the people. And that's significant because the National Liberation Front wanted food, supplies, tax money, recruits. So all those things were being taken from the people and being taken in increasing numbers and amounts as the war continued. And of course, initially the NLF wanted to convince the people that they needed to do this because the liberation of their country was so important. Some people did it out of loyalty to the NLF, but others did it because they were fearful of what the NLF would do if they didn't give them to them. So when they didn't have to, and the people themselves were always on the verge of starvation. I mean, the war was devastating to them, and they've been living in circumstances of war since, well, at least you could say that at least since 1946, when the French Indo-Chinese War started, and probably before that. So they were in terrible circumstances in the villages. And so this intelligence network, treating the people well, which encouraged the intelligence network, helped to protect the people in the combined action platoons, but it was still dangerous. Their primary tactics in the combined action platoons were an ambush and patrols. And they did this at night almost exclusively. There was a daytime patrol they usually did in the CAPs, but this was more to just show the flag, so to speak. They wanted to show the villagers they were there and talk with them and get to and have good relationships with the people. But then at night they went out and they set their night ambushes, and this was really this was very effective against the NLF because the guerrillas were not used to this at all. The Popular Forces, prior to the CAPs getting there, the Popular Forces didn't set out ambushes.
Hmm.
So the NLF was used to being able to just come into the villages, gather the tax money, get the food, get the supplies, give their propaganda lectures, and without any interference. And now they could risk the possibility of running into a devastating ambush in the night. They never knew where they might be, and there was this web of ambushes around the village that could annihilate an NLF patrol.
Mm-hmm.
So it was dangerous in the CAPs, and periodically the NLF would attack the compound of the CAPs. Now the CAPs, for a good period of time in the war, the CAPs would establish a compound close to in the village and close to the edge of the village, possibly and they'd find an old structure, a home, or an abandoned French fort of some sort, not very large, but they'd fortify this with barbed wire, sandbags, weaponry, things of this sort. And their men would stay in this. Some of the men would stay in this, and then they'd send their night patrols out, and their day patrol would go out from that location. Their night patrols would go out to set their ambushes, and then in the daytime they'd come back in, and then they'd work on the compound to improve their defenses. But the compounds were never very strong. As I said, you're talking about the Marines in there, possibly 10 men, 12 men, and maybe some PFs.
Mm-hmm.
But the PFs usually went back to their homes. So, and at night you might have 15 men, 20 men maximum in this. So, and the guerrillas and even the NVA periodically would mass to attack one of these compounds. In those situations, there were some really desperate fights, and a number of the CAPs were overrun.
Mm.
As I said previously, one of the ways they tried to alleviate this situation was by having relief forces of Marine infantry close by who could then come to the aid of the CAPs if they were attacked.
Mm-hmm.
But a number of the CAPs were overrun, so it was dangerous duty, and they could die in it pretty easily.
Mm.
Uh,
So let me ask you about the how you did the research for the book. What would you collect? Where'd you get your information from?
I got a lot of it from Quantico, Gray Research Center at Quantico. They were really helpful. I got about CDs of oral interviews, CAP interviews with CAP members, and these were interviews done by the historical research program of the Marine Corps. They were done during the war in Vietnam. I listened to those. And a lot of my research was from there. I did a lot of reading about the CAP program, and I talked with some veterans also.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What in your research, what did you come across that most surprised you?
One of the most important things I saw here that I found in my research was that the CAPs evolved. As I said, initially they were supposed to be defense forces. And it was almost, well, I'll mention that in a minute, but there were precedents in Marine Corps history and institutional memory, if you will, for these units. But they put together a squad of Marines and a squad of popular forces troops, and for the defense, and they found a way to make them work, and they worked because they had that common purpose. They wanted to protect the people of the village. A lot of the Marines in these squads came to see the people in the village as family. They were very protective of them. I think Corson mentioned one time that it was just the basic idea of fairness that disturbed them, that these people were being so mistreated by the NLF, not only NLF, but the Vietnamese government, the ARVN troops, and even some of the American troops who came through there. They wanted to protect these people. In my research, though, I saw initially these platoons were supposed to be for defense, and it was a good idea for that. But then, as I mentioned, when the Marine Corps found that they could not depend on the ARVN and the PFs to pacify the villages within the enclave. The enclaves, the regular Marine units, the infantry units pushed the large units away from the enclave, and they pushed some of the guerrillas out, but there were still guerrillas among the population, and there were guerrillas who could still hide within areas of the enclave. So these villages had to be protected. So when the Marine Corps decided to do the pacification on its own, the real mission and the real ability of the CAPs to accomplish that mission came into play. They were the means by which the enclaves were to be pacified. And and they were very effective in what they did. They kept the guerrillas away from the villages. They were their security was very good. Also, they were able to keep the guerrillas from getting the food, the supplies, the intelligence, and the recruits from the villages. So this had a very large negative effect on the guerrilla movement. It really harmed them. As I said, that's the vital, that's the jugular vein of any insurgency. It has to have that connection with the population. They did not have that anymore when the CAPs could block those villages off. Also, they got good intelligence. Their intelligence was so good in the villages. And as I said, that was a result of that intelligence. Their intelligence was a result of their protection of the villages and their good treatment of the people, taking nothing from them, treating them well, helping them get clean sources of water, helping them build bridges, farm their fields, things of this sort. So they got so much good intelligence from the people that they were considered by a number of the intelligence agencies with working during the war. A number of those agencies said that was the greatest contribution of the CAPs in the war, their ability to gain intelligence for the people, for these agencies. They were able to find some of the hidden infrastructure, NLF infrastructure members in the village. This is the shadow government of the NLF, which is part of revolutionary warfare. And they were able to find some of them. They were the people who were responsible for enforcing and NLF rules in the village, and for supplying the guerrillas with making sure the supplies and the recruits and the intelligence got to the guerrillas. They were able to find some of these people and inhibit the actions of a lot of the others of them. Again, they had civic action, economic development. One of their greatest economic development accomplishments was that they simply kept the guerrillas away from the villages, so the people could have that tax money they had, keep the food they had, and be able to live in relative peace and farm in relative peace. And they protected the local government as well. But the CAPs were meant to be an important part of that enclave pacification. And that was where their real value was. And they were never really able to accomplish it to a great degree, partly because General Westmoreland didn't approve of the program. And he wouldn't allow personnel slots to be allocated to the Marine Corps for the Combined Action Platoons. He said, I think I have this quote pretty close. He said, if you want to play around with this foolishness, you'll have to eat the personnel spaces out of your own hide, which in effect meant that you're going to have to take them from the infantry units. He did not approve of the CAP program. and it didn't approve of the pacification programs of the Marine Corps. And in November of 1965, he started giving the Marines missions to perform search and destroy missions, in effect. And he wouldn't allow them to work on the pacification to any great extent. But I think, yeah, well, the combined action platoons were really very effective in the role they played in defending the villages and in pacifying the villages, but they weren't allowed to realize their full potential because they were not given the resources to expand within the enclaves to the extent they should have to become very effective. They were meant really, and it was a shortcoming of the Marine Corps plan, really, and the Marine Corps planning, although, as I said, they weren't allowed to expand the CAPs, but they should have been in a contiguous pattern within the enclaves. They should have been adjacent to each other. And this was one of the points that Robert Thompson made about this concept of an enclave. He said that it was necessary within the enclave to have the CAPs located in villages adjacent to each other so that the guerrillas couldn't simply go between them or go around them and go to another village. It was this adjacent pattern throughout the enclave would really make an airtight, so to speak, area where the guerrillas couldn't come in.
Yeah, don't leave seams that they could exploit. Seams between the different CAPs
Exactly.
locations.
Yeah.
Was there a question that you really wanted to get an answer for and took a lot of work to reach a conclusion, or you still would love to know the answer to some specific thing?
The CAPs didn't receive a lot of support during the war. And I think I can understand that, the fog of war, so to speak. Everyone had good ideas. No one quite knew which idea was really good and which one was just good and which was no good. So the CAPs didn't really receive a lot of support, but they were Westmoreland was commander in Vietnam, and he didn't like the CAP program, so that was negative. That was a negative for the CAP programs as well. I mean, there were a number of generals in the Marine Corps who really didn't like the idea, and a lot of officers who thought they wanted the war to be fought in a more conventional manner. That's one question I would have, why I didn't receive more support, but I think I have some pretty good answers for that. I mean, I can say it's a shame, but that's in retrospect. I think it would have worked well, but one question I have is really, it relates to an individual more than that. It's Lieutenant Colonel Corson was the commander of the program, and he wasn't really given command until February of 1967. As I mentioned, this was a man who was one of the foremost insurgency experts in the Marine Corps. He had conducted this Phong Bok experiment in which he discovered a few things he thought he'd use in the CAP program. He organized the CAP program. He developed a school. In June of 1967, a school opened in Da Nang for the training of the prospective CAP Marines. And so he gave a uniformity, and it was a 2-week school. He gave a uniformity of training to the CAP program. He even did a lot of the interviewing of the individuals. He's very careful about this. And then later he went on patrols with some of these CAPs to try to find out how they were doing. He just seemed to be the right man in the right place at the right time. Now that was in June of 1967 when the school was developed. And really in July, the CAP program was set up as a separate command altogether. It no longer had that connection to the infantry battalions I mentioned to you. He chose his sub-commanders of the combined action groups. And he was very careful about this whole process. Now that was in July of 1967. In September of 1967, he left Vietnam and went back to the States. I mean, I would really like to know why he did that. I mean, it seems as if this was the opportunity for him to self-actualize.
Yeah.
You know, he said one of his quotes, and I'll try to, and finally we had a way to defeat a communist insurgency. That he was saying that regarding the CAPs, and I think he truly believed that, and I think he did. That is, the CAPs in the villages defending the people and countering the propaganda and the and simply the fighting of the National Liberation Front. I think that he did, but he left, and later he wrote a book called The Betrayal, which was very critical of the war. He said he thought the war could be fought in a better manner, and one way he thought the war should be fought is to greatly expand the Combined Action Platoon program. And I read later that he was concerned about his health. He had young children to raise, things of that sort. But it just seems to me that I don't know if it's a question of sorts I have, but it really seems to be a shame. In this a question, I'd say this too. There were 3 people I saw in the history of the Combined Action Platoons who were really altogether fascinating to me. In one, either in a positive or a negative manner. One was Westmoreland, another was Victor Krulak, and the other was Lt Col Corson. Westmoreland may have been a very fine man in many respects, but he was a failure as a general in the Vietnam War. Krulak was a brilliant man, and he had an idea for the Vietnam War in his enclave strategy that I think was excellent, but he was very abrasive, very blunt, and made enemies, I'm sure, as a result of that. And very much of the same was true for Corson. He was, I think I've read, he was a brilliant man, but he wasn't afraid to tell a lot of people that too. People might have thought he was the smartest man in the room, but he was ready to tell you before you'd get an idea.
Did you have any difficulties getting this book finished or published?
Well, getting it finished was, I don't know, in many ways it was a labor of love. I believed in it. As I said, it started from the point where I was a confused and somewhat embittered 21-year-old getting out of the Marine Corps, and I've been trying to find answers for a long time, and this was just another way for me to find answers, I think, to the problem and find out what happened there. I mean, a lot of people will say that, the people that we caused so much pain, death, and hardship in Vietnam during the war, but this was an excellent idea. That is, enclave strategy with the CAPs was an excellent idea, and if it had been pursued to a greater degree with a lot of support, I think it could have made a difference in the lives of a lot of Vietnamese, those Vietnamese who didn't want to live under an authoritarian communist government. And there certainly were those people. The war itself, I start from the idea that the war was there. The war was there. I don't deal with why it was fought. We were fighting it, but then too, as I said, there were a lot of people in South Vietnam who didn't want to live under a communist government. And even more after they'd experienced it for a period of time.
So do you have any current writing projects?
Not now. As you might imagine, from what I've said, I'm interested in Corson, Lieutenant Colonel Corson.
Mm.
I'm not. I don't like biographies that much, I think, but if I could link it to some other subject, link him to some other subject in some way, I might be interested in writing something else. I might be interested in writing something about him. He was one of those rebels. When he prided himself on that. One of his heroes was Evans Carlson of Carlson's Raiders, who was a famous rebel within a military rebel within the Marine Corps.
Mm.
He's a fascinating man, though.
Mm-hmm. Do you have social media or website where people can follow your thoughts or work?
No, I don't. They can email me certainly if they're interested. I'm retired, and I'd be interested in hearing from anyone who might like to ask me about these things or discuss them. I'm thinking of putting together a Vietnam War history course and teaching that at some universities in the area. I was an adjunct at University of Akron, but I'm not doing that now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, if you want, I can put your email address in the show notes for people to check out if they want to contact you about the book.
Yeah, that'd be fine. I'd be interested.
Okay. What do you hope, at the end of the day, what do you hope this book will do for readers?
I think we'll show them that the CAP program was an effective insurgency concept, but it was poorly used, and the potential of the CAP program was squandered as a result of that.
Well, that's all the questions I have. Or do you have any parting thoughts and words?
I think I'd only repeat that, the Combined Action Program was, within the context of the Vietnam War, was a very, very good counterinsurgency concept. It was carefully thought out. It was carefully planned. It was tailored to work within the enclave strategy. It might work under other circumstances, but that would have to be looked at carefully. But it did work very well. It protected a lot of the people of South Vietnam from some of the worst excesses of the war.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say too that the people who served in these units could be proud of what they did.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it, really.
Yeah, actually, it's interesting. I think a variation of this was attempted in both Iraq and Afghanistan. So I'm just curious if someone were to do a study of these CAPs versus sort of what was tried in these modern wars, just a contrast and comparison kind of thing. So that's something that what you've described makes me think of or wonder about.
Yeah, I don't know that much about it to comment on. I've read a little of what they tried to do with the CAPs in I think they were doing it in Iraq for the most part. I don't know about Afghanistan, but again, I I don't know much about it, but that's never kept me from offering my opinion on anything.
Yeah.
But I don't think they were committed enough to it. I don't think they have to go in and make a plan for what they're going to do, and it has to be at least as careful as they were doing it in Vietnam, with a school with proper preparation and training and cultural training. That's one other thing I think a study of a cultural study possibly of the CAP program would be valuable. You're looking at it, this was a situation in which people from two very different cultures were brought together, and how they interacted and how it worked. It's really pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. All right, well, thank you for taking the time to speak with me.
Well, thanks for having me, Chris. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
In the next episode, I speak with Sir Max Hastings about his new book on Operation Pedestal, a World War II convoy operation to Malta. Bullseye the subscribe button to catch that episode. Thank you for watching this video version of Military History Inside Out. If you liked the episode, please subscribe and hit the like button. If you're looking for military history and general history including true crime, please check out my YouTube channel, WarScholar, my podcast, Military History Inside Out, and my webpage, warscholar.org or militaryhistorypodcast.com. If you're looking for space history and the science, technology, and business of space, check out my YouTube channel, Spacewalks Money Talks, my podcast, Technology in Space, and my website, technologyandspace.com. If you're looking for fiction, including sci-fi, horror, fantasy, mysteries, thrillers, film history, gaming, and more, please check out my YouTube channel, Chris Alvarez Full Contact Nerd, my podcast, Full Contact Nerd Interviews, and my webpage, chrisalvarez.com or fullcontactnerd.com. Thank you for watching.